From the News Channel 5 Network, this is the Takacs McGinnis Elder Care Law Hour.
Welcome to Takacs McGinnis Elder Care Law Hour, where we explore the many issues that arise due to aging, disability, and unexpected illness. I'm your host, Tim Takacs.
And I'm Barbara McGinnis. In today's episode, we'll be talking about little-known resources. Before we introduce our guests, though, Tim and I are going to talk about some little-known facts about elder law. So, Tim, why don't you start with just telling us what is elder law and how is it different from traditional estate planning?
Well, traditional estate planning typically deals with people's money and property and what happens when you're dead. You know, I mean, basically, elder estate planning, is and was. People walk into the the estate planning lawyer's office and says, "I've got X, Y, and Z, and I want to leave something to my children, my spouse, or whatever." And that's that's generally a traditional estate planning. And elder law is really much more than that. It does include estate planning, but because it's elder law, we're typically not dealing with, like, say, younger people who are in their 30s or 40s who also need estate planning. We're talking about people who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and certainly older than that, who not only need estate planning but need to plan for the rest of their lives, and that life may include some chronic illness, unexpected illness, all the things that we talked about in the opening. That's really the substance of elder law.
Not just about how to pass assets along to the next generation, but maybe how do you use your assets to help take care of you as you age and become chronically ill, maybe.
Exactly. Like we say, is how do you find, get, and pay for good care, for people who need it. And
that can be often a lot more challenging.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's what we do every day. Yeah. And that's what gets us up in the morning, and it's unique for every client that walks into our office. All those are different. Okay, so we're talking about long-term care, Barbara. What about how long-term care gets paid for? I think people think that Medicare is going to pay for it. I've got private health insurance. And if they don't pay, then maybe Medicaid is going to pick up the tab. Is that how it works?
Well, sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah.
I think it is an area that a lot of people or have some misconceptions about, or really not well versed because they hope they never need to know how to pay for long-term care. And the truth is that 70% of us over the age of 65 are going to spend some time in a long-term care facility. So we do need to know how long-term care gets paid for. And even if we're not going to be placed in a long-term care facility, we may have chronic care needs at home that we need to figure out how's that going to get paid for, right? Mm-hmm. So Medicare definitely plays a big role in paying for illness. And a lot of it it pays for acute care. Hospitals, maybe some home health, but not custodial care, not the bathing and dressing of mom,
not the person that comes in,
personal care, but the skilled care. It will also pay for some time in acute rehab facilities or even rehab in a skilled nursing facility. It's time limited, and it's based on how much skilled care you need. Outside of that, private insurance will only function as a supplement. They generally are not going to pay anything that Medicare is not paying. And if you have long-term care insurance, well, that's great, but that's a pre-planning thing. That's something you would have had to plan for along the way. It's not, oh, I just wake up in the nursing home, now I need to get my long-term care insurance. It doesn't work that way. The role of Medicaid in paying for chronic care in the home or in a long-term care facility, it's probably the largest single payer, right? Pays for about 60 to 65% of
people who are in nursing homes,
of custodial care. But how you qualify, it's not just that you're impoverished or broke. It's people that meet a level of care criteria. I think Tennessee still has one of the most stringent in the nation about assessment of that level of care. So you have to be sick enough, and you have to meet the financial criteria, which means you have income caps and net worth caps. Then Medicaid will help pick up the tab if you qualify to live in a nursing home. Assisted living, it's still mostly private pay. Assisted living's a great service for people that need maybe assistance with activities of daily living. They need that supervised living environment. It's a great alternative for some folks, but it's largely private pay, so you have to be prepared for that.
Right.
So when you're talking about asset protection and you're planning ahead for the future, maybe the future of medical care or chronic care needs, what does that mean? Does that mean that it's just transferring everything to the kids, or is it a little bit more complicated than that?
Well, it's certainly much more complicated than that, and I know that there is a perception out there that, well, if I just give my house to my kids, then my house will be safe and blah 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 and all that, and but we don't see that too much anymore. There are big problems for people that are thinking, well, if I just give my house to my children or whatever, then they will hold it for me and they will keep it for me.
Right. People get rather short-sighted, right?
Yes.
They think that the only threat in life is the nursing home or government recovery.
Right.
They don't think about the other potential threats.
Exactly, and those threats are, okay, I'm going to give my house to my children, and I know some people have heard me say this and they probably don't like it, is that now you're giving it to the most unreliable people on the planet. When you give your money to your children, because children often, I mean, they may have good intentions, and they usually do. Certainly the ones that come into our office, typically have, but bad things happen to children.
Bad thing happens to good people all the time.
Exactly, and so maybe that money that you gave to your son or your daughter, they're going to hold. Okay, now the son or daughter, maybe they're married, maybe they go through a divorce, they have financial problems, they maybe have children, minor children, so then they're financially responsible for them. So all their intentions of giving that money back when mama needs it someday, maybe that can't happen.
Right.
We often, on this program and, in Open Line and Morning Line, when you and I appear on there, we often talk about trust and how to make sure that it's done, the asset protection is done the right way.
Right.
It really is it really is very technical, and it really, asset protection is very complicated and complex, if it's done the right way. I mean, we're not even talking about tax problems, and giving money and property away, so that's like even a whole different area.
And the use of trust to protect an asset. A trust is just a way of holding assets or holding title to an asset for the benefit of someone else. I think maybe we're used to working with them, but they're scary to people that don't know, they've never had that experience.
Sure, they think it's a black box in Siberia somewhere. That, there's like actually a place where a trust is. But you're right, it's just a legal way of holding property. Which, of course, for some people, it's like their house is their biggest asset.
Absolutely.
So do you have to sell the house to pay for care?
You do not have to sell a house to pay for care. It is a choice. It's a family choice about how you're going to use your home or the equity of your home to pay for care. And it kind of depends on the goal setup that you've got. You want to stay at home, your house and the equity in your house is your last asset. Well, maybe you use a reverse mortgage to help do that. It's not something I recommend a lot. It's unique to people's circumstances, but if you're going to be living in a nursing home, it's not a requirement to sell your home to live.
Medicaid doesn't take the house. Medicaid doesn't require you to sell it. The nursing home doesn't take the house. So, like you said, those are options that people have.
No actual lien is placed on the home during your lifetime, but at death, then when the house is sold, there is an attempt at recovery, and even if probate's not opened and they do not recover during the probate process, during the sale of a house, it may force it.
We've just got a few minutes or a moment left.
Actually,
tell us about conservatorship. People think that they call in, they need a conservatorship because they want control over mom's assets. Is that the way it works?
Well, barring in an emergency or a traumatic event, a conservatorship just because of chronic care is probably a lack of planning on someone's part. It will give you some control over the ward's assets, but it's subject to court approval for what you're doing. So we're going to wrap up, but we're going to put our contact information on, I believe, and that's there. And then when we come back, who are we talking to?
We're going to be talking to the Legal Aid Society of Middle Tennessee and the Cumberlands to learn firsthand about their services. So stay with us.